Hi everyone, I'm really excited to be presenting this webinar today. To begin with, I would like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung people as the traditional owners and true sovereigns of the land now known as Yarra. I acknowledge their creator spirit Bunjil, their ancestors and their elders, and I recognise their long and continuing connection to country and celebrate their rich cultural heritage. And I encourage you to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land in where you're joining us from today. Well, I would have in the chat, but because it's disabled, maybe just take a moment to think and appreciate in your own mind. Okay, thank you. This is just a little snapshot of what we're going through today. And to begin with, I will say, for those of you who don't know me, I'm based in Melbourne, Australia, and I am a Better Impact certified consultant, but I also do consultancy in basically anything to do with volunteering. And one of the, I guess, the skills that I have or that has helped me is having a green belt in Lean Six Sigma. And I'm going to introduce you, it's just a bit of an intro today. And if you're interested, I do encourage you to perhaps have a little explore online. There's plenty of information out about Lean Six Sigma. So what is Lean Six Sigma? Well, it's a combination of two very powerful process improvement methods, which are used to improve the capability and performance of business processes. So Lean was developed by Toyota and focuses on maximizing value, reducing waste, and simplifying and improving processes, while Six Sigma was developed by Motorola and is used to efficiently solve problems, reduce errors, and improve the flow of processes. So it's very common Lean Six Sigma in manufacturing, and in the corporate world. Pretty much most businesses these days will have someone who's focused on process improvement. And but yeah, so this is definitely, there's parts of it that you can apply and will help you with volunteer engagement. And today I'm focusing on the recruitment side of things. At its core, Lean applies a method to define a problem, measure current performance, and analyze the root cause of the problem to deliver improvements by implementing sustainable and effective solutions. Okay. So, and I will say that there's a lot to Lean Six Sigma, and this is only one small kind of part of it. So, okay, these are the key principles of Six Sigma on the left and Lean principles on the right. So with Six Sigma, you'll see customer is key, reduce variation, minimize defects, and use data to support decisions. And with Lean principles, again, customer is key, understanding what is important to the customer, so defining the customer value, building a value stream map, and I'm going to explain that today and how you can apply that for recruitment process, as well as creating flow in processes. We're going to talk a little bit about that. Pull, don't push. I'll explain that as well. And again, continuous improvement. So how can we apply Lean Six Sigma to improve the volunteer recruitment at your organisation? And how can we ensure that the process is user-friendly? So if I go to the next slide, this is just a little snapshot first before I go through the mapping side of things. But here are some I guess, key points around making your process volunteer friendly. The first one is mapping out and reviewing the volunteer recruitment process, which we'll go through. Seeking input from current volunteers to review and improve. This can be not just about the recruitment process, but in general around all your program or your processes and across the life cycle of a volunteer. It's also around removing any unnecessary steps, which in Lean Six Sigma is called waste from your recruitment process. So I'll be going through that a bit today and talking through the 8 types of waste and where that applies to volunteer engagement. This one is not Lean Six Sigma, but I guess it's just something that is important, and it can be, fitted in there in the whole continuous improvement side of things. And this is something that I see a lot of as a Better Impact certified consultant, of when I do reviews and of, maybe someone's been using Better Impact for a number of years, and it's time to do a bit of a review and see if there's a way that things can be done better. Because the other thing is, often with Better Impact, there's so many options, and if you don't know what you don't know, it makes it very hard. So in regards to questions on your expression of interest and or your application form, only asking questions which, if they're not necessary, just they're not needed then. And if they are personal questions, explain why you're asking them. So again, I see this quite a bit where it's, if you think of things like, what is your ethnicity? What gender do you identify as? Are you Aboriginal or Torres Strait? All of those kinds of questions, which, you and I understand that you're asking them because there's a reason your organisation is either required to, or they're looking at making sure they're tracking their gender and diversity, and needing to align with, policy within like hospitals and government, that sort of things. But a lot of the time it's not explained at all. So from the volunteers' perspective, they're thinking, well, really, what's that any of your business? So explaining in Better Impact in your description, but if you don't have Better Impact in it, explaining why you're asking it, and also providing them with an option to opt out as well. So, and then that helps you with your data tracking and understanding, how diverse your program is as well. Okay, so then communicating in a timely manner and making the process as quick as possible, because particularly post-COVID, people are busier than ever, wanting to get engaged in an organisation, get started, sign up. They don't want to spend 30 minutes filling in an application form. So if there's an option to have an EOI first, expression of interest first, where they can just, have 5 or 6 quick questions, that can be really helpful. And the last one is involving current volunteers in your recruitment process for new volunteers. So ideas of this is around group interviews, inductions. Where can you involve current volunteers in that recruitment process? Because that helps build community for new volunteers to have people that they know already and they get to know throughout the recruitment process. It's also helping with the knowledge of current volunteers and giving them an opportunity, if they would like to be, in a bit more of a leadership position, and for them to share their skills and also welcome new volunteers into the organisation. Okay, so we're going to talk about mapping the volunteer recruitment journey. So in Lean Six Sigma, this is called value stream mapping. So why would we do this? Well, it documents the process and it illustrates flow throughout your recruitment process. So and I will show this a bit later on, you're not only looking at what the steps are, we're looking at, how long does it take for each step for an individual, and how long is between each step? How long does it take to get from filling in an application form to the next step, which might be, coming into an interview, for example, and seeing if does it flow nicely, or are there areas where there's bottlenecks? Are there areas where perhaps there's double handling, things slowing down the process? Because if we can reduce or, make things flow nicely, then it will make a smoother process for the volunteers, and it will also mean that volunteers are recruited and onboarded quicker and able to help your organisation quicker than if they've got lots of roadblocks along the way. And also understanding interactions. Don't worry, I will go through this as well. But for example, interactions, different staff members, or different kind of roles, different departments, also what systems are being used, that side of things. It's really helpful to understand. What is it? Well, the mapping the or value stream map is understanding initially what the current state is. Um, and then after you understand the current state, the how is all about identifying waste and identifying opportunities for improvement. So then you can uh, redo the mapping in future state of how you would like things to be. Um, with the what as well, I'll talk a little bit about this. If you can have data in there as well, that is really helpful. Understand it can be sometimes quite tricky, but from data, I mean things like not only approximately how long does it take to go between steps, but also, how many volunteers are recruited through that process. So, if you're open at all times and volunteers, applications come in and dribs and drabs, um, you know, perhaps looking at doing intakes might be more fruitful in regards to your time, but it also provides an opportunity for them to meet other potential volunteers, and it just makes a more engaging experience for them. And also it means that you're not constantly stopping and starting, but you've got a bit of a process around, okay, this group of we're aiming to recruit this many volunteers, and this intake is going to have, we're going to have intakes at these times throughout the year, and they're going to go from information session to applying, etc. So you can kind of plan how many volunteers each year ideally you can onboard, and how many you need as well. Okay. So in a bit of a snapshot, mapping or the volunteer recruitment journey value stream map is a linear based process map. It doesn't have any yes no decision points. So, yeah, a little bit different. And so I've got some examples in a little bit. It's from the volunteer view. So when this is done in manufacturing, you're looking from the customer side of their view. And in this situation, we've kind of seen the volunteer as the customer. So, because if they have a positive experience, then they will continue volunteering, and they'll also say nice things about your organisation and hopefully recruit more volunteers as well. That'll help recruit more volunteers and also retain. So, if we're looking at from the start and ending with the volunteer as well. It's really important to include key stakeholders in the mapping process. So having a think about that as well around who are the key stakeholders. Are they from different departments within your organisation? Does HR or some other area look after perhaps police checks? And as I said, including volunteer representatives in the mapping process, because often there can be little steps behind the scenes that perhaps you don't know about, or and yeah, that can be really helpful. And it also is really valuable to include all of the key stakeholders so they can help identify improvements with you as well. It's time-based process maps, so ideally, and yes, this is hard, I understand, but yeah, where possible, including kind of approximate times of how long it takes between each step, and if they're waiting 3 weeks to attend an induction, for example, how can we improve that so that the time frame is less? And recognise the start and stop point of the volunteer interaction, and also reflects flow and rework. So rework, I'll explain a little bit more in a moment because it's one of the kinds of waste. Okay, so steps to building a volunteer recruitment journey map. So the first thing is to determine the scope. So having a think about what triggers the process. Where does the process start and stop? So generally what I find works well, but it could be different for you and your organization, is starting when an applicant is expressing an interest or seeking an opportunity to volunteer in your organization, and then ending when an applicant becomes a registered volunteer. So if we only start at the point of an individual filling in an application form, then we're not looking at what happens beforehand. So for example, looking at how do they find information about the organisation? If they go on your website, is all the information up to date? Do they have access to, the role descriptions so that they understand the requirements of the role and, the recruitment process and all of those kinds of things? Because if they don't, potentially they aren't a good fit for the role, and that can lead to waste of your time and their time. So yeah. Okay, so who are the key, then beginning and ending with the volunteer, which I mentioned, building the current state volunteer recruitment journey map. So, and to do this, the best way I've found, and I think is the best way, is to get everyone into a room together. You can do it online, but it does work best in person, in my opinion. And having a big piece of butcher's paper up on the wall, and I'll show you in a moment the kind of what that looks like, and having sticky notes of different colours. So there's a bit of a colour code around that, which I'll explain. And after you've kind of, so then we want to add the material flow and information flow. So first we're looking at putting down the process steps. So they could be, seeking information about volunteering, completing an application form, for example. So doing that with the whole process, and then coming back and adding what the flow is. So adding the systems that are used and highlighting their interactions, as well as the internal, like staff, it's internal and external suppliers in Lean Six Sigma lingo, but really, staff or internal relationships, as well as maybe there's some external relationships as well. And we want to highlight, after we've done all that, we want to highlight where are there areas for potential batching. So having, like I said, intakes and having groups of individuals as opposed to just one-on-one going through. And also looking at what's called push and pull. So ideally what you want to have set up is, where possible, having it that volunteers are doing activities and then they come to you, or a notification comes to you when they've done that part. So rather than you reaching out to them. So an example of this is if you are needing to book in volunteers to interviews, for example, rather than you either sending emails out or hitting the phone and booking in times and doing all that side of things. One of the ways that can be it works really well was actually creating it. So like in Better Impact, I mean, other systems I'm sure have something slightly different, but creating an activity which is for, interview times, interviews, and then putting all the interview times in, and whether there's 10 people at an interview, and then letting them know as part of the recruitment process, they then book themselves into the interviews. So you can just kind of sit there and see all the shifts filling up, or the interview slots filling up, and in the meanwhile, while that's happening kind of in the background, you can be working on other things. So that's them doing the pushing as opposed to you doing the pulling. Okay, then we've got to think about waste and identify waste, and collecting data as well, so where possible. And then the last thing is identify improvements. So this will make a little bit more sense when I show you the next slide. Okay, so this is an example, pretend, current state volunteer recruitment journey map that I put together just to show you. So on the left, we've got the key. So process steps are in that kind of lighter orange color. So you can see first you would put those down. So as a, a cross-functional team, I guess, or whoever's involved, ideally you're not doing this process on your own. You're having, and even if you are, there's only one volunteer coordinator or volunteer manager, it's highly likely that there are other people somewhere involved in the process as well as volunteers, and getting them involved to kind of actually help with what are the steps currently. And then after we've done the top ones, then we can work on the other ones as well. So and systems, so seeking information, maybe currently it's around on the phone, on the website, maybe they do it come in in person. And then for internal suppliers, I've put volunteer advisor, volunteer coordinator, whatever the role is called in your organisation. And perhaps there's marketing, because marketing are involved in putting information up on your website. And yeah, so kind of going through all of the steps. I've just done, a portion of it. And you can also do this for, you could kind of go, okay, initially we're going to do this for when they're a registered volunteer. And then we might want to look at the next part of the volunteer life cycle. Maybe it's on about, the onboarding and regular training as well. So you could do that as a second part as well. And then together it's around looking at what are the improvement ideas as well, that from looking at this currently. And I haven't added times, but that's something that can also, I guess a lot of this is discussion as well. So, and kind of, I guess, being open to questioning things. So, okay, seeking information on our website, yeah, is it all up to date? Do we need to have a recruitment plan developed so that we have more avenues for organisations to find out about us? Potential volunteers, as an example. And in this example I've got here, so complete application, that, in the PDF on a website, and, an improvement idea could be around having an online volunteer application form, such as with Better Impact. That way it's not the waste, I guess, of someone filling in a PDF and sending it in, and then a volunteer advisor or someone manually entering that information into whatever system you're using to manage your volunteers. So yeah, having an online one, which means that like Better Impact, where they enter it and then straight away that goes into the system and a notification comes to the volunteer coordinator. That can be a really helpful way and quick and easy way to reduce the waste. And things like reviewing the application form, is it still up to date? Are there questions that perhaps we could improve on? And, a lot of these things are as part of that continuous improvement that ideally you're doing anyway. So, and getting volunteers involved in as well. So have we reviewed our role descriptions lately? And, is there a volunteer that, from each role that might be able to give us some input and thoughts on, perhaps there's some additional things, tasks that, that could be a possibility, or perhaps there's some tasks on there that no longer happen. And then in this example, we've got invited to an info session. Perhaps this is done through Outlook, and example opportunities for improvement could be, developing an FAQ, which is around what the recruitment process is, and also having an online information session. So perhaps, and this doesn't work for everyone, and that's okay. It's just an idea, because this has worked for organisations where I've been with who receive huge amounts of, very fortunate, who receive huge amount of applications when they open up, like through Better Impact, within 24 hours, 300 applications, that's great. But perhaps, having a bit of a filtering before that, so to make sure that the applications that come through, are they, ones that are actually a good fit for the organisation. And you can also, in your application forms, you can certainly have, custom fields which help refine that kind of selection process as well. So, are you happy to undergo a police check, for example, or if that's a requirement, are you, another example is if you're only looking or only requiring volunteers for, say, Monday afternoons, making that really clear somewhere before the process, so you're not getting applications coming in for people that have spent their time filling in the application form that aren't suited for the requirements that for that particular role or recruitment that you're looking for. So online information session, that can be one way to kind of make sure that people get the information, or you can do them in person, online or in person, where they really understand, okay, now I understand what the role's requirements are, and now I'll fill in an application form, as opposed to beforehand when perhaps they don't have fully understand what's required of the role or your organisation. And then having email templates as well. So every kind of little step where you can standardise things, such as having email templates, checklists. So having an induction checklist, for example, having, all of that is kind of making things easier to follow for staff members, and making sure that the volunteers are getting the same amount of information as well, that it's not dependent on whoever's giving the induction, but really around, following the steps. And if you're not the one giving the induction, providing or making sure that whoever is giving the induction has all the information and understands, what needs to be covered in the induction. So a checklist is a great way to do that. So in this example, we had attend an info session through an organised, like Eventbrite or one of those. And then some improvement ideas are around involving volunteers in the information session. So perhaps having a couple of volunteers talk about their experiences as a volunteer in a particular role. That can be a way to kind of share their stories, but also provide a bit of connection and an opportunity for current volunteers to be able to, share their experiences, and also hopefully inspire other people to organise, volunteer with your organisation. And then I've also got their trial intakes. I mean, these are just examples, but having kind of putting it all out there on brown paper is really helpful to kind of have a think about what can we do here that's a bit different. And like I said, if you can have times and those kinds of things involved in there, it also helps. And it just is an approximate, it helps, I guess, determine where there could be areas for improvement, such as, how can we reduce the time between these steps? And the last one I've got around inviting to an interview, perhaps that's done through Outlook. Okay, maybe they don't have a volunteer management system. An improvement idea is getting a volunteer management system, and also trialing group interviews, seeing how that goes. So that's just a little example of current state. And waste. So this is when you've got that all mapped out, having a think about these things. So these are the different or 8 different types of waste in Lean Six Sigma, and not all of them are relevant for volunteer engagement, but I'll in the next screen, I'll just show you kind of some of the ones that are awesome. There we go. So under kind of defects, rework, that's one type of waste. So this can be due to errors. So, you know, from an application form that's on a piece of paper to filling it in to a database, for, maybe there's errors there. Poor quality information, typing errors, double handling as well. You know, like I said, the example I gave before, if you can have an online application form, then you're not doing the double handling of an applicant filling in an application and a staff member or a volunteer filling it in as well. Human error and also misunderstanding of the process. So then we've got overproduction. Now, sorry, I'm just going to have a quick set. So yeah, some of the there's it was developed in production kind of manufacturing, so that's why the words are a bit sound like that. But I guess overproduction, if you're applying it to volunteer recruitment, it could be around recruiting more volunteers than required, or recruiting more volunteers, and not being specific about what your actual needs are as well. So like the example of if you only need volunteers for a particular role on a Monday, then, perhaps make that known beforehand, and that those individuals can perhaps, who aren't available on a Monday, maybe they're interested in another role. Okay, so then weighting. So with weighting and Lean Six Sigma, this can be anything around people, parts, systems, facilities, anything like that. Any idle time waiting, really. So it could be things like waiting for management approval, bottlenecks, manual decisions. For example, and police checks. Is there a wait, between when they apply for a police check and when it comes back? Having a look at that. Some things may be out of your control, but looking at, okay, well, is there an opportunity to get them started on that maybe at an earlier point, or something like that? Non-utilized skills. So perhaps so this is waste of not using people to the best of their unique abilities. Non-utilized skills can also, it can be acceptance of poor performance as well. So key people who aren't engaged in the process, in the change. So potentially this could be staff members as well. So yeah, having a think about, are there any opportunities to make sure that in the recruitment process, and the volunteers as well, perhaps there's opportunities to ask them what their skills are, and perhaps they can also be involved in volunteering in multiple roles. Transport, so this may not be as relevant, but this could be, movement between sites, or using hard copies instead of soft copies. Anything that doesn't add value to the recruitment process, really. And inventory, queuing. So this is also around, again, it may not be relevant, but having duplicated records, that can be an issue as well if you've got in paper records as well as records in better impact. Is that necessary? Motion, so anything to do with movement of people, or or machines, systems, things like that that don't add value. searching for stored files, for example, commuting between sites, inefficient movement between processes. And the last one, excess processing, which I've also mentioned before. The kind of other areas of a waste are poor training. So perhaps, looking at reviewing the whether it's an induction or ongoing training, if, the volunteers aren't being given the information that they need to um, do the role in the best possible that's required, then, having a review of that and making sure that that's covered in training. Lack of standardization as well. So I mentioned around, where possible, to having email templates, checklists, those kinds of things as well. So with email templates, it's really handy to think of the whole volunteer life cycle. And, do you have email templates through every kind of step of the process, or through the life cycle as well, whether, right through from an email welcoming them, or an automatic email when they first send through an application or expression of interest, right through to, when they're leaving the organisation, and, perhaps hopefully as other parts of exiting as well. So whether it's, having a phone conversation, or saying, thanking them for their time in person, but I guess having it also in writing as well, that they've no longer a volunteer with the organisation, can be really handy, and having that as a template where you can add additional information that to tailor it. Poor supervisory skills as well. That's another area that could be considered waste. So, are the people that supervising the volunteers, do they need some upskilling as well? And what about ineffective scheduling? That's another area of waste. So yeah, there's lots of kind of areas that you can see. If it doesn't add value, then perhaps it can be considered waste. Okay, so this is also Lean Six Sigma lingo, I guess. To identify improvements, it's normally it's called voice of the customer in Lean Six Sigma, but voice of the volunteer. And here are just a few ways that you can seek that voice of the volunteer. So involving them in the mapping. Understanding what's important to them by asking. So this is that, I guess, defining the customer value, defining the value of, what's important to the volunteer. And if we apply it to recruitment, is it, that they're recruited quickly, that that it's streamlined, that they have opportunities to meet other applicants and staff, learn about the organisation. But if you don't ask them, there's a chance that you could be assuming something that's not the case. Then there's also gathering feedback through surveys, workshops, and informally. So when, this can also be part of that current state process to do a survey, which asks them, throughout the recruitment process, what worked really well, or worked well, and what can be improved on, and what are some ideas that you have for improvements. So something that I've done before that's worked really well is actually, and this is not just for recruitment, but this is for an within the volunteer program more broadly, is around getting a group, or inviting a group of volunteers, current volunteers, to a workshop where, and perhaps it can be for a particular area, a particular department, and having them come in and essentially responding to 3 questions, which is, what's working well currently in the program, and what can be improved on, and use, like, being mindful of the language as well, perhaps not what's not working well, but what can be improved on, and then asking them to actually be involved in coming up with some ideas on how things can be improved as well. And that can then lead to lots of improvement within your program. So qualitative and quantitative data to measure improvements. This is, again, really helpful. So it can help more broadly with uh, capturing and communicating impact of volunteers, but also from a perspective, and often boards and executives, they want to see the data around how many volunteers were recruited this year, and looking at how many were retained as well, how many intakes did we do, and that led to 30 new volunteers, for example. That can be really helpful, and comparing the current state to then trialing improvements, putting improvements in place, and then capturing that data again to be able to show, yeah, okay, so these areas worked really well, we're going to keep those, or perhaps this one didn't quite didn't work out, so we might not go ahead with that improvement idea. Another area for Voice of the Volunteer is, again, around providing feedback on resources. So perhaps it's around your onboarding documentation, asking a handful of volunteers to review it and provide any information or feedback, around what do they think is, would be helpful. Is anything missing from their induction? Okay. So with standardized forms, so having forms as well. So I mentioned around checklists, email templates, but just having a think about, okay, if this is something that is repeated over and over again, do we have a standard form for it, or a email template, or a checklist? Okay. Also with Voice of the Volunteer, or the mapping process, asking yourself what has caused a delay, if there is a delay. So maybe there's a delay between a particular process and the next one. What's happened to cause that delay? What needs to happen to eliminate or reduce that delay? And also thinking about, are there any unnecessary steps? Are there any steps that just aren't necessary, we can just get rid of? Maybe it was relevant 2 years ago, but maybe it's not now. So yeah, as I mentioned, it's around challenging your current protocols and what is actually needed, and what's more of a habit, perhaps. So yeah, identifying and addressing rework. Are there any aspects of your process which are being repeated unnecessarily? And yeah, the example of paper-based forms compared to having an online system. Another way that an improvement that could be possible within your organisation is introducing parallel processing. So if there's any bottlenecks happening, could they be eliminated? And perhaps not all processes are required to be in a kind of step-by-step sequence. Can police checks be happening earlier on, so that while they're waiting to attend an induction or not induction, an interview for that was a poor example, but that they can get started on their police check, for example, working with children's check, just some kind of get things happening a bit smoother and more quickly. And importantly, with Voice of the Volunteer, or any kind of opportunities which you are seeking feedback from volunteers or staff, it's being really I guess mindful that providing them that feedback loop. So if they've identified improvements, and letting them know, okay, these are the ones we're going to action, and that side of things. Because the same with surveys, if you ask for information for for them to fill a survey in, are you also providing them with a bit of a, an update or report that explains what the results of the survey were as well? Okay, so then this is around the future state. So after you've kind of mapped everything out and identified those improvements, then you can look at, okay, what do we want our future state to be? And often there's some trialing and between kind of current state and future state to help you understand, okay, of those improvement ideas, which ones are we going to go with? So in this made up example, we've, seek information, and we've increased the ways that people can find out about volunteering with the organisation. Maybe they complete an online information session and they then complete an application to Better Impact, and maybe they, if you, and that takes you to Better Impact. Looking into a group interview, again, by Better Impact, and attending a group interview. So I guess you're looking at seeing where are the ways that how can we streamline the process and, reduce that waste. So it's just my last little bit of information, and then we can go to questions. I guess being mindful of change, and if you are doing these improvements, trialing things, applying some basic kind of change management processes as well. So is there an executive that can be an active and visible sponsor, because having that champion, I guess, can or sponsor can help with other people being on board with the change, considering communication, make sure that people are updated along the way with changes, and involving volunteers and employees. So, and considering how they will be impacted as well. Maybe updating them in a volunteer newsletter, for example. Engaging change champions. So perhaps there is, some some experienced volunteers that can perhaps be involved in now becoming kind of, I guess, mentors, and maybe coming along to talk about their experiences at information sessions, involved in group interviews, that side of things as well. And getting people, they can then also help with spreading the word and getting other people on board with the change, and providing training and resources if necessary to make sure that everyone understands what the new changes are. So if the process improvements happen and go ahead, making sure that other departments, if they need a new induction list, etc., that they've got everything that they need. And with communication as well, with change management, you want to have a think about having multiple channels of information. So whether it's in a newsletter, in person, through on Better Impact when they go in there on, my impact page, just to make sure that it's the communication is getting out there around the change. And having you think about any actions that you can take as well, which will motivate volunteers, employees to accept and actively participate in the change. And so that's the end of my presentation, Didier.
Okay, so quite a few coming in here. So first question from Janine Bedros, do you have any suggestions for balancing between pull and push? I find that if I use too much pull early in the process, I don't convert as many applicants into volunteers. So good question.
That is a good question. I guess I'm not sure if this is advice, but I think and I totally understand the challenge there. Considering, I guess, the engagement side of things, so it can be helpful whether there's I guess as long as they feel that they have had an opportunity to have some engagement, so whether that's through maybe it's a online no, sorry, in-person information session, or perhaps it's through, in-person interviews, for example, because I think if having that engagement and starting to build that rapport with you can definitely help with feeling, or I guess being happy to uh, initiate some of those other actions that they can do that you're asking them to do. So I'm not sure I've answered that very well, but it's a tricky one.
It is. No, I think you've answered that well.
There's a question. Can I just, there's a question from Karen. Oh, it's just yeah, a lot of elderly volunteers that struggle with technology. Okay. So this comes up quite a bit. And I think the app on their phone, people generally find that is really quite easy to follow. It could also be down to your setup. Perhaps there's areas for improvement there. But I think, I've done some work with organisations like Dementia Australia, and, a lot of the like peer support program, and, most of their volunteers are older people who have who have experience with dementia, and that's been going really well. So I think having a look at getting My Impact downloaded on the app on your phone and having a look at it and just checking that from the user experience, is it really easy to follow? Even just little things like, are the colors, does it make that's something that's kind of really helpful to do, is also checking the volunteer view in if you're using the desktop, and just making sure that it's as simple as possible, and not overwhelming with information. And also, are you providing them with opportunities to learn? So whether it's having some like a simple guide, it's usually like only 6 pages or something, that step by step with print screens around how to change their details, how to sign up for shifts, those kinds of things. But also being mindful of different learning styles, and not just having a guide, but also perhaps inviting people to come in person and have a presentation, and an opportunity to actually have a play on their phone as well, and test things, maybe set up some fake activities so people can feel more comfortable. Also having champions as well. So whether it's if you're rolling out My Impact page, and maybe it's on site and you've got iPad there, maybe having one of your experienced volunteers there for the first week or two to be able to show, whether it's on the iPad or on their phone, this is how you can do it. Because I've found that often people, regardless of their age, once they are given the tools to be able to learn how to do it, it can be quite empowering for them. So I don't think, yeah, look, in my experience, you might have one or two that struggle with it, but I think people generally, over the last few years, a lot of people had to learn during COVID how to communicate with their families, and through phones and things like that. So I think, yeah, having a look at what resources and what, I guess, training to be able to guide them through that process, or even just for a week having an opportunity where they can 12 to 1, you'll you welcome people, volunteers can come in, and you'll give them a little demo, or that they can drop in, I guess thinking a little bit about that as well. Hi Jasmine, City of Melbourne. That's nice.
There's one more from Jess, if you can see that one, Christine.
Which one, sorry?
From Jess Conway. Basically, her question is, do you think it's worthwhile putting a time frame forward to applicants on how long they have to complete the onboarding requirements before they lose their place? At the moment, we do have troubles with someone taking 1 to 2 months to complete their online training before they start the role, it's hard to gauge if applicants are still interested in coming on board or not.
Okay. It does depend on the role, but I guess having intakes can be really handy for that, and providing them with an FAQ that this stage we ask you to complete your induction videos or whatever in this time frame. Having that information at the very start can be really helpful as well, so that when they come along to an information session or even on your website, knowing that yes, the requirement, and yes, so yeah.
Perfect. I think that is our last question, Christine. So thanks everyone for joining today. Thanks so much for Christine on an amazing presentation.